Welcome back to another interview episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm here today with a very special guest, a man who, if you were a role player on computers back in the 80s and early 90s, you would have known the name New World Computing. It was a mainstay of the industry, and of course, he touched on many other stations of the industry. After that, welcome to the show, Ronald Spitzer. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that.
Ronald Spitzer, that's right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah, I'm glad you're taking the time for us today. So, Ronald, before we get into video games and all that fun stuff, let's go back a couple of steps and tell me a little bit about your educational background, where you're coming from before you get into the industry.
Well, my education background is after high school at 16, I went to work in the family business. So didn't go to college. And after a few years in the family business, became a stockbroker, which didn't stick. And I actually met John Van Cannigan, who was the creator of the Might and Magic series, playing board games at a game convention. We're both avid board game players.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, what year are we talking about approximately?
83 or 84.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And we met over an Axis and Allies board game.
Oh, nice.
And we actually met up at his house, and we played maybe hundreds of Axis and Allies board games. And one day he showed me the video game he was working on, or the Apple II game he was working on, Might and Magic. I didn't own a computer except for an IBM computer I had bought for $10,000 in 1980 that I returned the next day and bought a memory typewriter. So I didn't have a computer, didn't play computer games. I only played board games. But that's how I met John, and then came on board New World Computing, and the rest is history. And then after New World, I joined Electronic Arts, where I ran the affiliate label and international licensing outside of Europe. And during my tenure at EA, it's going to sound impressive, I was responsible for 30% of Electronic Arts revenue during my tenure. However, most of that revenue was affiliate label and licensing. So it's, I didn't create it out of thin air. I managed the relationships and signed deals that accounted for it. But this is the hard work and sweat of good companies like SSI, New World, Software Toolworks, and others at the time. And but I captured the revenue for Electronic Arts.
Gotcha.
And then after that, I had the opportunity. I left Electronic Arts, had the opportunity to become the first U.S. licensee for the original PlayStation as a developer. And I did that with my business partner at the time, Nick Pelayev, who's now running studios for Jagex. We were originally stationed in the Sony building, so we were in the Sony building when they were downstairs. And every time we got a new build of the hardware device, we keep running downstairs because we had problems. We kept crashing, kept bugs, or whatever, but we kept running up and down the stairs. Then after that, I was asked by the board of directors of a SoftBank-funded company to run their studio, which I did. And then I transitioned into consulting, where I consulted for a number of developers, both in the United States and the UK. And to this day, I'm consulting for software companies in various industries, not just game industry.
Gotcha. Now, there's a lot to unpack in that very active resume. So let's go back to the initial start with New World Computing. Now, at the time, were you a co-founder of New World Computing? Are you coming in after the company has already been founded?
John founded the company with his wife, and they were the sole shareholders at the time. I later became a shareholder shortly thereafter. But John is the original founder of the company, and while at a time I considered myself and John considered me a co-founder, I don't want to get down that road of confusion, so I just put myself as the former COO of New World Computing. but I was the only other equity shareholder during my tenure.
Okay. And when you arrive, Might and Magic is in the pipeline.
The first
Is it already finished, or?
Oh yeah, it's already finished, and we were selling it through retail using reps. These are sales reps that rep not just your product, but rep other people's products as well, and not just video games or PC games, but also, peripherals and whatever they could find to sell. So you were with somebody who may or may not be experienced in selling your product, and we were in a few outlets, not the biggest chains, but we were in a few outlets. I think we had Babbage's. We had just gotten into Babbage's, or maybe that was after. I'm not really sure, but we were in a spiral-bound notebook. About a big 8.5, 11, or legal size, maybe even been legal size spiral-bound notebook with the discs in it, which didn't fit on the shelves too well. So initially, we were not prepared. We did not understand that you needed to have be a part of a standard size to fit on the shelves properly, so you could be at eye level or have the opportunity to be at eye level for your product placement.
And why did you go with that packaging format?
That was before I came on board, and it was. I believe that there was an outside graphic artist that came through, and it was beautiful. It looked great. If you bought that as a consumer, you really liked it because it folded out. It was spiral bound. It was high quality, but it was expensive, and it couldn't be put at eye level at retail.
And we're talking 1986 at this point, right?
1984, 1985.
Oh, okay.
I believe so. But
yeah,
the dates all get cloudy, so you'll have to forgive me.
Not a problem. So it's an Apple II game at this point. I'm guessing this was just because that was the machine that was available to design on, or do you know?
That was because that was the computer that John had and loved, and he had played many games on his Apple II, and he loved that platform. And as most gamers did back then, that was the preferred platform for playing games, besides the consoles, obviously.
Gotcha. So what was your function in the company when you joined?
I was responsible for all operations of the company, all business operations of the company, and all sales and marketing of the company.
Okay. So you're coming from being a stockbroker. Are you moonlighting at New World Computing?
No, I quit. I only lasted as a stockbroker for less than 6 months.
Okay.
It was not my thing.
Gotcha. So, and I mean, those are the heady 80s. I mean, sorry, it's just imagining Wolf of Wall Street type of situation.
No, it was nothing like that. I was respectable working for a company called The Equitable, now called, I think it's called Axis or Axios or whatever now. And I was their first broker that they had in the Los Angeles office, but I was all alone and had to call in all my orders to New York because they had no Series 24. I think it was called the Series 24. They were in the office. So, I mean, but it's a side story and it's not really.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's all good. So you're going through these reps. How does a startup company in the early 80s even get a hold of the reps to get them out there?
I honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember how we got in touch with the reps that we had initially. I joined the company after John had gotten a couple of reps already in place. I think they were contacts through the graphic arts company that was used, or the printer that was used, but I would be speculating here, and I really can't tell you the truth. But after that, once you've gotten in, everyone's calling you saying, we would like to rep your product to here and there and everywhere. About that time is when we got the call from Jim Levy, who was the founder and president of Activision, the original Activision. As you know, Activision went bankrupt and was reconstituted. But the founder of Activision, and his pitch was brilliant and it was compelling, which was let us use Activision's sales team to sell your product. We understand your market. We can help you get into all the retail stores we're in, so we can expand your market, and we can help you with our with our in-store merchandising efforts, so we can make sure your product's at eye level, because it's hard for a small company to have merchandising reps go into retailers and make sure your product's at eye level or properly placed or have an end cap. But a larger company like Activision, which is going into those retailers themselves for their own products, can bring that expertise to you. And so we struck what was then the first affiliate label, or now it's called publishing partner, I think, but either one works, structure in the industry.
Oh, really? Okay. And so
prior to that, there was either publishers or developers. You were either a developer and got 15% or 18% commission on sales or net revenue, or depending on what you negotiated, or you were a publisher and had your own sales force and or used reps.
Gotcha. Now, just to kind of imagine this, they're taking over the distribution and marketing of the product.
Not marketing, just distribution.
Just distribution. You guys are still handling manufacture and all of that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so from the business standpoint of New World Computing, was this obviously increased the sales, increased the visibility of the product. How did you strategically go about expanding the product? Was there any pressure from Activision to have more product in the pipeline, sequels and so forth? What's the next step from getting that distribution deal?
Well, they're really not. We're not pressuring us. We're not. Our relationship was not one where they were pressuring us to come out with new products. It was more of, we think we can sell these many on the PC if you make a PC version. We think we can sell these many on the Commodore 64 if you make a Commodore 64 version, because we would have no way of knowing how many could be sold, but they could, by estimating using their own products that they're selling into stores, as well as understanding the market of competitors and how they're seeing those orders be filled for competitive role-playing products at the time.
Ah, okay. So that's basically giving you access to a huge chunk of information that you otherwise wouldn't have had.
And our product and our sales went up tremendously. We were selling, I think it was 5,000 or 10,000 units prior to joining up with Activision. Then all of a sudden we got an order for 50,000 units.
Oh, wow.
I think it's 50,000. It could have been 25,000 initially. You have to forgive me again. I won't say forgive me again every time, but just please understand that that's over 30 years ago. So,
of course.
So then we would get the 25, and so we had to figure out, how do we fund 25,000 units or 50,000 units of product at a cost to manufacture of. I have spreadsheets in front of me, but these prices can't be right. So forgive me. But I think that they're, it was like $3 or $4 a piece. So that was between $150,000 and $200,000 to manufacture those products. And that was a lot of money when you're working out of a home or a garage.
So how did you handle the financing of that new product?
We were very careful. I won't go into anything else. We were very careful and managed to fulfill the orders.
Okay, so you are expanding rapidly at this point. Was the porting being done in-house, or were you guys having to hire outside talent for that?
We did all the porting in-house of the. We hired people in to do the PC versions and the Commodore 64 and the Amiga versions when they were appropriate I think Might and Magic 3 was the first Amiga version, but there could have been Might and Magic 2 as an Amiga version. I just don't remember. The funny thing is the Might and Magic 1 Macintosh version, we were sent in the mail. A programmer, who I'll mention, his name is Doug Grounds, who's a brilliant programmer and a terrific individual. I haven't spoken to him in 20 years, but he was a Macintosh savant, and he loved Might and Magic, and so he programmed it at home, did all the art himself, and said, "I'd like to have you guys publish my version of your product on the Macintosh."
Cool.
It didn't take more than 15 minutes for us to decide we needed to hire this guy. So we hired him and brought him on board and had a Macintosh version.
Oh, that's amazing. So how quickly are you guys adding to the payroll of the company?
Pretty rapidly. We hired a number of people very early on, programmers and artists, and we were doing. And then when we moved into our own warehouse space, our own office and warehouse space, we built out our own warehouse where we were manufacturing the product. So we were just getting the raw discs in, and we were then doing the printing ourselves, not ourselves, but we were handling the printing ourselves, and then getting the boxes in, and then all together as a team, stuffing the boxes with manuals and CD-ROMs and PC floppy disks, and shrink wrapping them and putting them in pallets. And so the whole team was, everyone, after you're done, you also were in charge of, you were also involved in boxing the games.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an all hands on deck operation at this point then.
Correct.
Okay. Now, Might and Magic 1, that is essentially your only product for almost 2 years, if I'm understanding the timeline correctly.
Probably so.
Yeah. And then Might and Magic 2 comes out, and after that, you start to diversify the product output. How is that decision made inside the company? I mean, sequels to Might and Magic make sense, but how do you make the decision internally to say, okay, now we're going to start developing different products?
Well, we played more board games than we played computer games at New World Computing when I was there. So a lot of the ideas and thoughts we had about what we would come up with were derived from the board gaming sessions. We would create our own tile set for Axis and Allies and lay it over all out in the warehouse and have like multiple boxes of Axis and Allies pieces, and we would play these gigantic warehouse-sized battles of Axis and Allies. But also, we also made a sidestepped into, and I'm not sure the timing when, but we bought a board game company at one point, Task Force Games, the creators of Starfleet Battles. Both John and I were avid Starfleet Battles players at one point. And we would travel around to play Starfleet Battles and play other games. And so we wanted to create, we bought a board game company and hired the former president of the U.S. Games Workshop to be head of that. And we wanted to create a board game and a computer game out at the same time. So we'd have a computer game version and a board game version. And that's where King's Bounty came from, which later became Heroes of Might and Magic. It was because of that desire to have a board game and a computer game out at the same time.
Okay, and did you actually get both of them out?
But all game decisions on product was what we're going to create was all John, 100%.
Oh, okay. So those two things. I'll go back for just a moment to the board game and video game simultaneous launches. Or was it planned to be a simultaneous launch of both products? And how were you approaching the dual development?
Well, plans don't, as they say, plans don't last when you're in contact with the enemy. The board game took its own path. Let's just say that.
Okay, and so King's Bounty comes out. Now, King's Bounty was also the first game I think that you guys release also on console, or at least right. EA does the publishing on that, if I remember correctly.
We were involved with EA early on in the Sega in the Sega development, which I'm not going to get into any more details on that, but we were involved early on in Sega development, and we published a few of our titles on the Sega platform through Electronic Arts.
Okay. Now, were you still an affiliated label with Activision, or were you with Electronic Arts?
At that point, we had transitioned from Activision to Electronic Arts. Activision had gone through some significant management changes. They renamed themselves Mediagenic, and they decided they wanted to be in the hypercard business, not in the video game or PC game business.
Yeah.
And, I can tell you, all I can tell you is the founders of Activision who were there prior to that management change were all terrific people, brilliant, designers. The creator of Zork, Michael Moriarty, I think that's his name, right?
Yeah, Moriarty. Moriarty. And now I'm going to kill him.
I haven't thought about his name in 30 years. Brilliant designers and creators of games. And so when they switched to HyperCard, there was really no room for New World Computing at Activision anymore. And so we made a transition to Electronic Arts.
Gotcha. Now, just quick, weird legal questions, the lawyer in me. When you have these affiliated label contracts, do any distribution rights to the games that were distributed by Activision stay at Activision? How does that work?
There's a transition period. So there's a term on these contracts, and usually 2 years, sometimes less than that, depending upon what you negotiate. And then the product that's sold through Activision is still subject to returns, still subject to stock balancing issues. So you're still responsible for dealing with those returns from Activision. And what sometimes in the early days, there were sometimes that Electronic Arts was asked to take back product that was sold by Activision. And of course, they didn't want to do that because they didn't receive any money from the retailer for that. So there is some difficulties in the initial stages, but you can work through it. It's nothing deal breaking in either case.
Gotcha. And so you're starting to diversify the portfolio from just the Might and Magic series, and I think we did discuss this briefly before our conversation a while ago over LinkedIn. But there's one game I do want to ask a little bit about, especially with your guys' board game background, Nuclear War.
Right.
How did that game, the decision to make that game come about? Because it's a very unique game, especially with the humor.
We played the card game. We played the card game a lot. Let's just say a lot. And we knew Rick Loomis at Flying Buffalo very well. That's how Tunnels and Trolls also became a game of ours that we created. But we knew Rick, and we always loved the game, and we thought it'd be a terrific game. We were naive. We thought it'd be a terrific game, but the consoles were all coming out of Japan at that point, and there's no nuclear war in Japan.
Oh,
so
I didn't even make that. Yeah.
So we couldn't sell, couldn't license, couldn't do anything. It was very difficult to have any sales really in the Japanese market for that product because of that.
And how important was the Japanese market for you guys? Because I know Might and Magic 1 and 2 get tons of ports to Japanese systems.
Yeah, and it was very important because in those days, it was a straight licensing fee. So we would receive, I'm not going to, I can't really go into the straight details, but we would receive, over $100,000 in straight licensing fees for various products. And that was an important cash influx because it was straight cash, straight profit. And you got to remember back in those days, we were selling max 100,000 units of any one of our products. It wasn't the days now where you're doing millions of units. And we also had to do and marketing was all done in magazines, print magazines, long lead times. We had to pay for there was no digital distribution. So when you're selling a game for $49 now or $39 now, you don't have to pay the the $4 or $5 for the cost of goods and the holding cost, the inventory cost of maintaining that inventory, and the retail cost of getting the marketing materials, of the in-store marketing. So all that has gone away. The co-op advertising and all that it's a different economics than it used to be.
Gotcha. I can imagine. Okay, so that puts the whole thing into another perspective. I was always wondering, the nuclear war seemed like a really cool idea, a really good implementation. I played the game incessantly, and I was always wondering why it didn't take off in a bigger fashion, but that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Okay, so you guys are now, you're diversifying the portfolio even more. I'm just looking at the list here on my second monitor through Moby Games of the release schedule, and you can definitely...
And after my Magic 3, which is when I left, anything after that, John would be a much better person to contact about that, or even Mark Caldwell than I can be to help.
I understand, but so you guys are still, you're growing a base, you're getting a lot of product out there, especially platform wise. Then you transition over to EA. Now, if you guys were already with EA, was it familiar territory to go into doing the affiliated label stuff for them?
We mean after I left New World?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were already at EA, and so the transition was fairly smooth. I was just moving over to Electronic Arts to manage the relationships between the various affiliates that were there. The SSIs, Strategic Simulations Inc., which had Tony La Russa Baseball was one of their sports titles that did very, very well over the years. And Software Toolworks, which had Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, if I believe correctly.
Yeah, that was their big claim to fame.
And that one did gangbusters. And trying to think who else was, and then LucasArts, who had Monkey Island and some other products was there as well.
I believe Ubisoft. I can't remember if Ubisoft was still there.
It was there for a while, and then US Gold was there for a while. And but my memory escapes me about who all the affiliates were back then. So
what exactly was the day-to-day life of the affiliate manager like then?
Well, it was just reaching out and contacting the affiliates on a regular basis, and also reaching out and trying to find new affiliates. But I was also handling international licensing outside of the U.S. and Europe. So I was also involved in licensing activities in China and in Korea and Japan to a lesser extent, and South Africa and Russia, and all wherever the product needed to go.
Okay, so were you then working with local distributors? Was EA trying to build their own publishing apparatus in those countries?
No, I mean in some cases they were, and that would be handed off to a publishing unit. I was only involved in the licensing aspects when we were licensing the product, either for porting, where they would port it to, in the case of Brazil, for example, they ported to 8-bit cartridges were still popular in Brazil when we were already on 16-bit. And so we ported for 8-bit cartridges to Brazil. Or in other cases, it would just be licensing the product for it to be translated and converted to a local territory.
Oh,
and
okay.
It would be PC or whatever. But there were, and it would be, sometimes it would be straight licensing deals where there would be a set fee that is paid, and other times it would be per unit, and it really depended upon the deal. And there was also some OEM bundling where you put your product in with a Dell computer and so forth.
Okay. So must have been, just juggling a whole bunch of relationships at the same time.
It was juggling a whole bunch of relationships, and it was managing the internal department, which was responsible also for when you're in an affiliate label, when they're talking about co-op advertising, and the marketing fees that you are paying besides your AL distribution fee. There's an AL distribution fee, and then there's a co-op marketing fee and advertising fee, and that is managed internally within Electronic Arts. And then you're managing the people that are managing that co-op fee structure, which is also finding appropriate places to put little marketing advertisements in the various newsletters or mail outs that Babbage's or Best Buy would be sending out.
Gotcha. Now, because these are affiliated labels and these are not internal studios to EA, I'm guessing that you didn't have as much control over the creation of the product, timeliness of the completion of the product, and so forth. How was an issue like that dealt with? Let's say Studio X that was making a game misses its deadline. How do you guys deal with that as not the publisher but the distributor?
Well, the main point the two times when it became an issue was at quarter end, when we expected a product to be delivered in time for the quarter, and it did not hit that quarter, and then that would cause some frustration internally. But we were in some cases we were promised it would be there, and then it just wasn't delivered. We were not getting any warning, and other times they gave us enough warning. 60 days out, they found a bug, or they found a reason not to publish the product at that time, and we just had to cope with it. And other times it would conflict with internal studio product release. So there's a factor that happened at Activision and happened at EA. If there was a competing product coming out at the same time, in the case of SSI, for example, they had
Tony La
Russa, and I think EA had Earl Weaver baseball at the time. So we couldn't release both at the exact same time. So we had to work together on scheduling the product releases. And it wasn't one of those things where EA bigfooted the relationship with SSI. It was one where they came to an understanding together about what made sense, but both wanted to be out in time for baseball season. So you had to balance that track record, and especially since I think at one point Tony La Russa was just doing better than Earl Weaver baseball.
Gotcha. Those are very interesting and intricate relationships, and you must have been looking pretty far down the pipeline, because a problem like that, isn't something that you're going to try to take care of 6 weeks before launch of a title.
But understand, they're independent companies who make independent decisions, and not all of them are controllable. Sometimes their decision or the information gets to them, and they tell us immediately that they found out that they had a problem they didn't expect. But that still impacts us on in an unexpected deliverable of a product, or even it can happen the other way. They're ready to ship. They plan the product to be shipped in September, but they're ready in early August, surprisingly so. That rarely happened. But we would tell them, we don't have the orders. The orders are going to be placed for September, so the retailers aren't expecting the product. So even though they're ready, we can't take delivery because we don't have the outbound orders ready until September.
Gotcha. Now, it's an interesting business model. You mentioned that you were responsible for roughly 30%, if I remember correctly, of EA's revenue at the time?
Correct.
Okay, so obviously this is a fairly big business for EA, this affiliated label side of things.
But let's be clear, this unit had been responsible for between 15 and 25 or 30% of EA's revenue for a number of years. So I didn't all of a sudden create it from 0 to 30. I grew the business while I was there to 30%, but it was existing prior to my involvement.
Oh, of course, yes. And so how did EA, because it did talk a little bit about the conflicts and schedules and so forth, was this seen as just an aid to the normal EA development teams? Was it seen as a direct conflict, or was it just seen as part of the business as a whole?
The business side of Electronic Arts loved the affiliate label business. because it gave them access to revenue they otherwise would not have. So the business side loved it. The studio side was less enthusiastic because that was not their product from their studio that was being sold by their sales force now. And that's just a reality of the situation. And I'm sure I would have felt the same way if I was in the EA studio. But the reality of the business at the time is you needed to have product flow to maintain shelf space at retailers, because EA was trying to keep the eye-level content and not allow Take-Two or Activision or Acclaim to have product that could supplant it, because they didn't have new, fresh product to bring out to the market. So it was important for the sales staff as well as for the business side.
Gotcha. And also, just as a structural note, the sales staff at this time, and we're talking 91 through 93. Right. So the sales staff at this time is dealing with what percentage are they dealing with small mom and pop computer stores and the like, and what percentage is going through big software chains and or mainstream retailers?
Yeah, I couldn't give you a percentage. But I would say the majority of the sales were going through the big retailers at that point.
Okay. So do you have like just one person assigned to software, et cetera, at the time, or is it?
Yeah, they wanted to maintain relationships. They wanted to maintain relationships. So the biggest the biggest accounts were usually to the most senior or most seasoned salesperson. They maintained their relationships. Sales is all about relationship building, and because you need to know not just how much the customer wants to order, but you need to help them through the process of understanding the types of products they like to sell, and understanding the products that they don't like, and making sure that they get their needs. If they order 50,000 units or 20,000 units, and they want 5,000 clue books at the same time, you want to make sure that it's delivered, and that takes a relationship.
Gotcha. Now, a good point with the clue books. Were you guys also handling clue books for the affiliated studios, or
yes.
How did that kind of thing work?
Well, we were buying their finished product. We were not creating the clue books. The clue books were created by the affiliated labels in most cases, I think in all cases. And we then would buy them as finished products and then ship them for our distribution fee, which depending upon the year and time, but when you were back at Activision or back at Electronic Arts, distribution fee was somewhere between 18 and 25%. And then there was a defective return you had to expect, which was about 2%, because you'd never see the defective products back. They would just say the product was defective at retail. So that would be about 2% allowance. And then there was the co-op advertising, which is a 5% allowance. So you were that was basically between 22 and 32% off of your wholesale price that was going to the affiliated partner, and then the publisher was getting the remainder.
Okay, cool. Interesting structure. Now, you don't stay forever at EA. You move over to Northstar Studios.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to become the first U.S. licensee for the PlayStation, and I couldn't turn down that opportunity.
Now, obviously, this happens in 1993. So PlayStation launches in 94 in Japan. And I'm just curious because, of course, Trip Hawkins still has a bit of a relationship with EA with the 3DO and all of that. How did you see the market? Why did you see the PlayStation at that point in time in 93 as such an opportunity?
Well, it was Sony. I mean,
that's a brilliant answer.
Sony is not. I don't mean to disparage. I'm not disparaging Sega or NEC and their attempts in the market, or Nintendo, and obviously wouldn't disparage Nintendo in any way. But when Sony is going to launch into the market, that they're serious and it's going to be a quality product. And it was. I mean, I can't imagine anyone turning down that opportunity to publish early on the Sony PlayStation.
Gotcha. So you start a brand new studio,
right?
What is the decision-making process about, okay, what kind of product do we need? How do we adjust? Because most of your experience so far has been with computer software. I mean, you've done console, but it's mainly computer.
It's conversions of that. And I didn't make the decisions in a vacuum. The first thing I did was hire the most brilliant product development person I knew, who was my longtime friend I've known him since he was 12 years old, which was Nick Belayev, and brought him in as a partner in Northstar Studios, and he made him head of studio because there is no one better. So I'm biased, and so he was in charge of running the studio.
Okay.
Or in charge of the development process. Now, obviously, I had input, and I made all the final decisions. But from a creative standpoint, I know when I should step back and not disturb the brilliance, of those with more talent than I've got.
Gotcha. So, and I got to ask, just from a finance standpoint, are we talking venture capital at this point, or?
I had two investment partners who are two companies in the industry that invested in Northstar at the time. They heard that I was going to become the first U.S. licensee for the PlayStation and wanted to get in on that, and so they invested in it. And just to tie a bow around it, everything that could go wrong did go wrong at Northstar, and it was 100% my fault. I take full responsibility for it. And the company eventually, in a few years, wound down, and we didn't go bankrupt. I paid off all the debt of the company myself, paid the burn rate of the employees, 50 employees for a year myself, and just made sure that we wound it down properly. And I won't go into the details of all that, but it was 100% my fault. Take full responsibility.
Okay. Did Northstar ever actually ship any product?
No.
Okay.
We started developing product, and for various reasons, we had funding issues and we couldn't resolve.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, being the first licensee, obviously it's new territory, and you already alluded to it with the development kits and updates to the development kits coming in and so forth. How much pressure or anxiety does that level of insecurity add to the day-to-day operations of a company?
To be totally honest with you, I didn't feel very insecure I felt no insecurity in the beginning because I had initial funding and my own funding and others, and I didn't feel the pressure or I didn't recognize the pressure at the time. Instead, the pressure came from trying to hire the most talented people we could, and enough talented people. And that was one of the challenges we faced. We were in San Mateo, so we were competing with Electronic Arts, Sony, and all the other big players as a new startup studio for a new platform. And we were just not attracting the talent with the speed we needed to fully staff our products. And that was a part of that was one of the things that held us back.
Gotcha. It makes sense, unfortunately.
Yeah. But when your top team is excellent, it makes everything else easier, and you don't feel as much pressure. Now they probably felt a lot more pressure than I did. So, but that's a question for them, not for me.
Gotcha. So after the Northstar experience, where do you go from there?
Had reached out. A recruiter reached out to me to interview for a position at a SoftBank Japan funded developer that was a port house that took Sega 8-bit cartridges to the Windows platform, and they wanted to become a original. They wanted to become an original product company.
Okay, so they were porting or emulating? Just
they were porting from console to Windows.
Gotcha.
And and they wanted to get into the original property creation. And I spoke with Ron Fisher, who was the vice chairman of SoftBank Japan, and he asked me, as well as the chairman of Kinosoft, asked me to join them and to become president and help them make that transition to that. I won't go into much of the details. It's public record what happened. The SoftBank and the board of directors of Kinosoft, which I was not a party to, had disagreement, which they took to court. And then the company was dissolved shortly after the resolution of that disagreement.
Gotcha. So while you were there, how would you describe your role? What were your goals while you were there?
My goals were to first to analyze where they were as a business, where they were in their original product creation state, which we analyzed the number of employees we had and what their talent skill was and so forth, and see if we could scale up. It was based in Chicago at the time, and it was very hard to attract industry talent to Chicago because they didn't want to relocate, because if they relocated and they were laid off, where do they go? Because it isn't the pool of companies as there were in California or in Austin, Texas. And so we eventually, after a year or so, relocated to Austin, Texas, and started to staff up when the disagreements happened.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. So you were in that process at that point.
Correct.
Okay. And
but from a development standpoint, we were self-funding our own products, and there were plans for them to be on the PC and the console and so forth.
Gotcha. So the company gets wound down, or gets embroiled in this legal dispute. What do you do as the person who's supposed to be running the show do when these outside forces suddenly hit? I mean, how does a manager react to something like that?
Well, every situation is going to be different, and depending upon the internal dynamics of the company, both the where the company is in its life cycle and the support one gets from the management of the board, the senior management of the board, the directors, and so forth. And it's challenging because you're answering questions from the employees as to what does it mean to them, and at the same time, you don't have those answers, and you really can't provide them, and you have that balancing act where they think you're not telling them something that you know, and that isn't the case. You just didn't know.
Gotcha.
Because it was outside of your control. It's a difficult balancing act for any manager, and every situation is going to be different when you're in that. The contrast with Northstar and the winding that down and Kinosoft is I was in complete control of what happened at Northstar, and ultimately at Kinosoft I was not in control. I was not involved in. I was not named in the lawsuit. I was not involved in the process of the lawsuit. I was just someone who sat through depositions.
Oh, yes, the most entertaining pastime known to man, depositions.
Yes, that's putting on your lawyer hat.
Putting on my lawyer hat and having spent way too much of my life in depositions. Yes. Now, I wasn't the one being asked questions, but trust me, on the other side of the table, it's no picnic either. So, okay. So that leads us to Spitzer Associates.
Right.
How does that company come about?
Well, in 2001, my 81-year-old mother could no longer be on her own. She needed to be watched, and I don't mean that in a entire sense, but she just couldn't do everything on her own, and she needed to be in a house. She either needed to be in an assisted living facility or be in a home where she can ask people to pull something down off the shelf or cook a meal or whatever. So I brought her into my home and started to and watched over her for the next 20 years until her passing this past October of '99. But the flexibility, I decided to do consulting because it gave me the flexibility to be able to be there for my mom when she needed me and at the same time earn a living.
Gotcha.
And so
Okay. And what kind of activities? What kind of activities you've been doing?
Well, my first client was NEC, who wanted to consider getting back into the console market. And so they asked me to do a review of the situation in the United States and give them a presentation about the console market. And I won't go into a lot of details of what my presentation was, other than to say, don't do it. Because their first foray was not successful. And I didn't think they had the institutional, they were most likely not going to be as successful as they would hope, but they saw the success of others and thought it was time to revisit the discussion. And so there was that. And then I also consulted for various studios, development studios in the US and in the UK, and helped them with licensing the products, managing publisher relationships, front office stuff, involved in helping them find acquisition partners when they sold their company, and help them manage that relationship after they sold. So those are the kinds of activities that I got involved with. I also developed relationships with private equity firms and assembled a team of industry executives. And we went around for 5 years trying to acquire a number of companies in entertainment, both interactive and IP owners that were interesting targets. This was back before private equity was willing to invest in companies at the multiples they are today. They were never we had some strict criteria. They couldn't be hostile takeovers. They had to be within certain financial guidelines. So we couldn't pay large multiples. So we had to get the management teams on. So it was a very involved process, but we established a relationship with private equity firms. We had many meetings with many companies in our industry and outside our industry, but no transaction. But there was no concluded transaction.
Oh, okay. Now that the multiples guidelines that you mentioned, was that a slow transition to the higher multiples that we see today, or was that something where you can say, yeah, it was pretty quick that they decided, okay, the world has changed or something?
Well, the reality is when we were looking, it was still a console market. It was still a packaged goods product market when we were trying to make the pitch, and it was still more of a hit-driven business than it is today. It's still a hit-driven business, but there's enough product being sold through e-commerce, through electronic platforms, that the profit margins are much higher. It's much more easy to your mistakes are less costly. You can, in fact, right now you can, as you know, people are launching alpha products for testing, and people are willing to play alpha products that you couldn't do that on console.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more involved in testing and so forth. But because of that, it was a much riskier proposition for private equity back then than it is today. Today, you can see a track record of success and failure, and you can measure both their failure and success, and that would give you a very good indication of what the likelihood is of that studio or that publisher of being able to continue that level of success or failure and take that into consideration for your valuation exercise. But back then, when you were dealing with console product, it was a much harder equation.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Now, another aspect of these kind of investments that I've always thought was hard to quantify was the idea of key talent staying at a company. How do you go about trying to put a value on the talent and assessing the risk of losing said talent?
That is a very interesting proposition. We looked at one company in Japan, and so a bunch of Americans or foreign nationals who all were English speaking, trying to decide who are the key players in Japan. Well, the Japanese companies are notorious, if they're divisional, of moving around employees. So,
really?
Yeah, I mean, I should say they're notorious, so you have to forgive me. They are. It's hard for a Westerner to be able to understand who are the valuable employees and who are not. And there's no real way we can tell besides getting the internal managers on your side to identify the key employees. And so that requires a level of trust and building relationships with those key managers. But it's very difficult to acquire a Japanese company as a Western. In fact, I don't believe a private equity firm has managed a successful transaction in Japan yet. So at the time we were talking about it, I knew there had been none.
Oh wow!
But then in the Western countries, it's a little different because the talent speaks out. They let you know they're the talent. They're ever present, and it's about managing the relationships and make sure that you can maintain that good talent as part of the process.
Okay, and does that then involve direct conversations with the talent, or
it will when you get down to that? When you get past the high level of agreement where you've come to an agreement that there is an opportunity for a transaction and you want to explore further, then you would ask the senior management to identify the key talent, and then you would go interview the key talent, and then you'd ask the key talent, who do they think the key talent is? Get a list from them, then get permission to interview those key talents and ask them who the key talent is. And that would build you a view of the company based upon who the actual individual employees view as the important members of their team.
Gotcha. Now, you've also talked extensively, or mentioned it again and again, the cost of goods shift or disappearance of cost of goods with the rise of e-commerce. What have been, in your mind, some of the downsides for a publisher or a studio of moving to e-commerce? Have there been any?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, you're in most cases, you have fewer places. You have, I don't want to say you have fewer places, but you have concentration of outlets that are available for electronic distribution where everyone seems to gravitate to. And to get them to look elsewhere is a struggle. So if you're not distributed by one of the key electronic distribution platforms, you're less likely to have people come to another platform because they don't want to put their credit card on 100 different platforms. So that's one of the disadvantages of that. But the reality is we're all buying from Amazon these days, and we're not going to Best Buy to buy our products. And so while there were some advantages because you got to go into a store and feel the box and look at the box and see what it is, from a publisher perspective, it's mostly a positive equation because you're now not able to have, you don't need to have the same level of physical inventory that you did before, which can put you at risk. For example, a story from the New World days, I think it was Might and Magic 2, but it might have been Might and Magic 3. We shipped out 50,000 units to retailers all across the country. And back then you had physical copy protection on all the discs, and the copy protection was flawed. So no one could boot the disc. So we had to get all the product back from all the retailers at launch and then replace the discs and then resend it out and hope we get restocked on the shelves. That kind of a problem no longer exists. And that's one of the a significant benefit of electronic distribution. If you have a fatal bug, you can correct that bug and upload it with a patch. Back in the days of physical distribution, there wasn't many. We did have some update from time to time and correct it, but so few of our customers actually downloaded the update because they were not familiar with that process.
Gotcha. And the idea of an affiliated label. I mean, if you look at Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, they have their own online portals for selling their software. But to my knowledge, it's only the internal studios that are doing something like that. Do you see a place for the concept of the affiliated label today in the market, or has Steam simply taken over that function?
Steam and Epic have taken over that role. Epic obviously curates their catalog more than most. Steam obviously does as well, but they have a different set of criteria, which works well for their business model. And but they both have taken over the business of being the publishing central. They take a distribution fee, 30 to 15%, whatever it is, same kind of dynamic, and that works. And people know they go to Steam or go to Epic and download their favorite content.
That's true. That's true. I have one final question. It's a two-parter. I asked this of all of my interview subjects. Looking back at your career, what would you say is one industry trend that hit really big that you didn't see coming, that kind of was a blindside? And what was one industry trend where you thought this is going to be the big thing and it fizzled out or went nowhere?
Well, I was a board gamer, so I didn't think computer games. Who'd want to play a computer game by themselves in a room when you could play board games with other people? Why would you want to do this? It makes no sense. So the entire concept of computer games made limited sense to me when I first was getting into it, because I enjoyed playing, but I'd rather play board games with my pals. So that's the big industry trend. And then what one trend that I thought was going to be big and then wasn't. I had hope for the Mac at some point being a gaming platform, and it didn't. And there was just no support within Apple at the time, and they really were not really interested in that. Apple II kind of died because of that gaming aspect. The Mac team didn't want to be. They wanted to be a business machine, and they didn't want to be in a gaming platform. And so there was little support for it. I had hope for 3DO and what it was trying to accomplish in the market. Both my former business partners, John Van Caneghem and Nick Beliath, ended up at 3DO at one point. And so I had hope for that as a platform, and it didn't pan out. But it was, I really can't point to one specific trend that I thought this was going to be it, and it didn't happen.
Gotcha. Okay, perfectly valid answer. Ronald, thank you so much for giving us of your time. And any final words for anybody out there who might, especially of the old New World computing days, who might be listening?
No, I'm just reach out to Carl, and if you have different recollections or have more recollections, please reach out to him and provide them. And if you have any historical documents from way back then, I recently published on LinkedIn a copy of Activision's original business plan from 1979. I have other business plans, but they're more recent, and I don't have permissions of their creators to put them out, and I haven't reached out to them to ask. But if you do have the original business plans or documents that would be interesting for Carl or for the community, please publish them on LinkedIn or submit them to Carl.
Thank you very much. And I do appreciate that call out. And I will be putting a link to references to everything we talked about here, as well as that Activision business plan in the show notes. Ronald, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Carl. I enjoyed it.
I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.